It began like any other spring morning. But by nightfall, an empire that had stood for over 1,000 years would lie in ruins. The people of Constantinople heard a distant thunder, not from the sky, but from the earth-shaking cannons at their gates. Trapped, outnumbered, and betrayed, they faced a brutal enemy closing in. Secrets whispered in shadows, desperate prayers echoing in ancient cathedrals, and then silence. What happened behind those walls during the final hours? And why does this one moment still haunt history? This is the fall of Constantinople, a siege of terror, treachery, and destiny. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 is one of the most significant events in world history. It didn't just mark the end of the Byzantine Empire, it signaled the end of the Middle Ages and the beginning of a new era. It's often called the day the Middle Ages ended. The conquest of this great city by the Ottoman Empire had far-reaching consequences that still echo through history. These walls, built in the 5th century, protected the city from invaders like the Persians, Arabs, Bulgars, and even Crusaders. The Crusaders had made things worse. In 1204, during the Fourth Crusade, Western European armies sacked Constantinople in a brutal campaign that left the city broken and weakened. Founded in the late 13th century by Osman I, the Ottomans rapidly expanded their territory, conquering large parts of Anatolia and southeastern Europe. He secured engineers, siege experts, and artillery makers, including a Hungarian cannon builder named Urban, who would design one of the most powerful weapons of the time, the Great Turkish Bombard. This giant cannon was capable of hurling stone balls weighing over 1,000 pounds at the city's walls. The roar of the Great Bombard shook the earth, and the ancient stones of the Theodosian walls began to crumble. The Byzantines had stretched a massive iron chain across the harbor to prevent enemy ships from entering. The people of Constantinople prayed for help, but none came. The Catholic West, still bitter over the schism between Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches, offered little assistance. The great Hagia Sophia, once the largest cathedral in Christendom, was turned into a mosque. He wanted to make it the jewel of his empire. It terrified Christian kingdoms and sparked renewed fears of Ottoman expansion. It was the end of the ancient world and the dawn of the modern age. It changed the course of history, altered the balance of power, and transformed the world forever. But it also had unintended consequences. As Greek scholars fled the city, they carried with them ancient texts and classical knowledge that had been preserved in the East. These texts helped fuel the European Renaissance, a rebirth of art, science, and learning. He issued orders to stop the looting, encouraged repopulation, began the transformation of Constantinople into Istanbul, the new Ottoman capital. Under his rule, the city would rise again, this time as the heart of a powerful Muslim empire. Constantinople, the last remnant of the Roman Empire, had fallen. Though some ships from Genoa and Venice tried to break the blockade, it was not enough. The city was alone, and everyone inside knew it. Mehmed responded with an audacious plan. His men greased wooden logs and dragged dozens of ships overland around the chain and back into the water on the other side. After a night of heavy bombardment, waves of Ottoman soldiers surged toward the walls. Defenders fought with everything they had, but exhaustion and overwhelming numbers took their toll. Giustiniani was wounded, and his departure from the battlefield shattered the defenders' morale. At last, the Ottomans broke through the walls. Emperor Constantine XI is believed to have died fighting in the streets, refusing to flee or surrender. The defenders were stunned. It was a brilliant move that allowed the Ottomans to attack from both land and sea. But the defenders held firm. They repaired the breaches as quickly as they could, using whatever materials they had. They fought with courage, determination, and the knowledge that if the city fell, their civilization would be lost. It was a revolutionary weapon, and its use marked a turning point in the history of warfare. Gunpowder, once a curiosity, was now the future of conquest. By the early 15th century, they had surrounded Constantinople from all sides. The Ottomans were determined to take the city, and Sultan Mehmed II, also known as Mehmed the Conqueror, would be the one to make it happen. At just 21 years old, Mehmed was a brilliant military leader and visionary ruler. He understood the symbolic and strategic value of Constantinople. It was more than just a city. It was a prize, a jewel, and the key to controlling 2 continents. Though the Byzantines eventually retook the city in 1261, it never recovered. Its population declined from nearly 1 million in its heyday to around 50,000 by the mid-15th century. He had only about 7,000 men to defend the massive city. Many were local Greeks, but a number of foreign volunteers joined the cause, including the experienced Genoese commander Giovanni Giustiniani. The defenders were brave, but they were vastly outnumbered and poorly supplied. Despite these challenges, they prepared for what they knew would be a desperate battle. And the empire was broke, the military was small, defenses were crumbling. Constantinople was vulnerable, and its enemies knew it. For centuries, Constantinople had been the capital of the Byzantine Empire, the continuation of the Roman Empire in the East. Even as the Western Roman Empire fell in for 76 AD, the Byzantines endured for another 1,000 years. But by the 15th century, the Byzantine Empire was a shadow of its former self. Once spanning vast territories, it had shrunk to little more than the city of Constantinople and a few outlying areas. It was a clash of civilizations, Christianity and Islam, East and West, the ancient and the modern. This was more than just a military defeat. It was the collapse of a civilization, the fall of a great city, and the dawn of a new world. Constantinople was no ordinary city. Founded by Emperor Constantine the Great in 330 AD as the new capital of the Roman Empire, it quickly grew into a thriving center of culture, commerce, and religion. Its strategic location between Europe and Asia made it one of the most important cities in the world, controlled key trade routes between the East and West, and was surrounded by natural defenses, the Bosphorus Strait to the east, the Sea of Marmara to the south, and the Golden Horn to the north. With its mighty walls, Constantinople had withstood dozens of attacks for over 1,000 years. The city's triple-layered Theodosian walls were considered impenetrable. The decline of the Byzantines had been gradual but devastating. Internal strife, civil wars, and economic collapse had taken their toll. Meanwhile, a new power was rising in the east, the Ottoman Empire. Mehmed prepared meticulously for the siege. He gathered a massive army, estimated between 80,000 to 200,000 men. On the other side, the defenders of Constantinople were led by Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos. The siege began on April 6, 1453. The Ottomans encamped outside the city and began bombarding the walls, day and night. One of the most remarkable moments of the siege came when the Ottomans transported their ships over land to bypass the great chain that blocked the Golden Horn, day after day. The siege continued. The city's walls were slowly falling apart. Food and supplies were running low. On May 29, 1453, Sultan Mehmed II launched his final assault. The fall of the city was brutal. Ottoman troops looted homes, churches, and palaces. Thousands were killed, and many more were enslaved. But Sultan Mehmed did not want to destroy the city. The fall of Constantinople sent shockwaves through Europe. It marked the final end of the Byzantine Empire. Historians often say that May 29, 1453, was the day the Middle Ages ended. As the siege of Constantinople dragged on, the pressure on both sides grew heavier by the day. For nearly 2 months, the sound of cannon fire echoed across the ancient city. The Ottomans bombarded the walls relentlessly, trying to weaken the defenses with gunpowder and brute force. He refused to hide behind palace walls and instead walked among his people and soldiers, boosting morale and organizing defenses. The Byzantines used everything at their disposal: boiling oil, flaming arrows, Greek fire, and sheer grit. But the city was slowly dying. Food became scarce, disease spread, and hope faded. Now the city was surrounded on all sides, land and sea. The defenders had no safe harbor left. This maneuver marked a turning point. It demonstrated Mehmed's genius and forced the Byzantines to spread their already thin forces even further. Constantinople was bleeding out, and the world seemed to be watching in silence. These soldiers were highly trained, disciplined, and motivated. They surged forward with deadly precision. By this time, the defenders were exhausted and wounded. Dressed in royal armor, he is believed to have thrown off his imperial regalia and joined the front lines. He fought bravely and was likely killed in battle. His body was never definitively identified, but legend says the last Byzantine emperor died with sword in hand, defending his capital. During the battle, Giovanni Giustiniani, one of the most important commanders, was struck by a cannonball or arrow and seriously wounded. He encouraged people of different backgrounds, Turks, Greeks, Jews, and Armenians, to settle in the city. He repopulated neighborhoods, rebuilt mosques and markets, and restored the city's infrastructure. Under his rule, Istanbul became a bustling capital of the Ottoman Empire, rich in culture, trade, and diversity. The overland routes through Constantinople were now under Muslim control. European powers, especially in Italy and Spain, began searching for new sea routes to Asia. This shift in trade and exploration would eventually lead to the Age of Discovery, when explorers like Columbus, Vasco da Gama, and Magellan would cross oceans in search of spices, silk, and gold. According to the customs of war at the time, a city taken by force could be looted for 3 days. Many Greek scholars, artists, and philosophers fled west, carrying ancient manuscripts with them. Feudalism, chivalry, and the old order began to fade. Gunpowder, commerce, printing, and new ideas began to reshape the world. The fall of Constantinople was the final blow to the old era and the spark for a new one. It was not just the fall of a city, it was the fall of an age. They brought knowledge of Greek language, science, literature, and philosophy that had been preserved in the East for centuries. This influx of classical learning into Italy helped ignite a rebirth of intellectual and artistic activity in Europe. After allowing a short period of looting, he ordered it to stop. He entered the Hagia Sophia, now largely emptied, and performed a Muslim prayer, declaring it a mosque. Its streets echoed with new languages, its skyline dotted with minarets, and its soul reborn in a different form. In the Christian world, the loss of the Eastern Orthodox capital was devastating. The ancient city had been the heart of Orthodox Christianity for centuries. Churches across Europe mourned the fall, but divisions between East and West remained. Though the Pope had called for help, the Catholic kingdoms of Europe had failed to provide meaningful support. Some even saw the fall as divine punishment for the schism between the churches. The city had changed forever, but it had not died. His gesture was symbolic. He had conquered not only the city, but the legacy of Rome itself. Homes were broken into, valuables stolen, and churches desecrated. The beautiful mosaics of the Hagia Sophia were defiled. The grand palaces of the Byzantine aristocracy were stripped of their riches. Thousands were killed, and many more were taken as slaves. When he was carried away from the walls, morale among the defenders collapsed. Many thought the battle was lost. The people knew that the end was near. Churches were filled with worshippers praying for a miracle. On May 28th, the last day before the final assault, Emperor Constantine XI called for a final religious service in the Hagia Sophia. People of all ranks and backgrounds came together: nobles, soldiers, monks, and merchants. They sang hymns, confessed sins, and took communion. Many wept, knowing it would be their last night as free citizens. His bravery inspired many, but it could not stop the inevitable. The Ottoman army launched a 3-phase attack designed to exhaust the defenders. First came the irregular troops. Basha stormed the walls in wild, uncoordinated waves. Many were killed, but they weakened the defenders. Soon, the outer walls were overrun, and the defenders fell back in disarray. The city, after withstanding centuries of siege and war, had finally fallen. Next came the more organized Anatolian soldiers, who fought fiercely and pushed the defenders to the brink. The enemy was too powerful, the weapons too advanced, and the numbers too overwhelming. The Byzantines, outnumbered and weary, scrambled to repair breaches and reinforce vulnerable areas. At night, fires burned along the city's walls, casting flickering shadows of the soldiers who guarded them, knowing that their world could collapse at any moment. One of the most terrifying elements of the siege was the constant pounding of the Great Turkish Bombard. Designed by the Hungarian engineer Urban, this massive cannon was a technological marvel. It could fire a 1,200-pound stone projectile over a mile. With a blast that shook buildings and shattered walls, the Byzantines had never faced such a weapon before. Their mighty Theodosian walls, which had resisted enemies for centuries, now crumbled under the weight of modern firepower. The Byzantines had believed that their harbor was safe, protected by a massive chain stretched across its entrance. But Sultan Mehmed refused to be blocked. He ordered his men to drag ships overland around the chain and into the Golden Horn behind the city's seawalls. It was an incredible engineering feat. Dozens of Ottoman ships were pulled on greased logs over hills and valleys, bypassing all defenses. It was the beginning of a new era in warfare. Despite the devastating impact of the cannon, the Byzantines continued to hold the line. Emperor Constantine XI led from the front. The Ottomans launched several assaults during the siege. Each time waves of soldiers rushed the walls, only to be pushed back by the determined defenders. Then came one of the most shocking and strategic moves of the siege, the naval maneuver, involving the Golden Horn. When the citizens of Constantinople awoke to see Ottoman ships inside their harbor, panic spread. As the siege entered its final days, the mood in the city turned grim. On the morning of May 29, 1453, just before dawn, Sultan Mehmed gave the order for the final assault. Finally, Mehmed sent in his elite troops, the Janissaries. In the confusion and chaos, a small gate known as the Kerkaporta may have been left open or breached. Ottoman soldiers poured through. Emperor Constantine XI chose not to flee. Once inside, the Ottomans began to sack the city. Yet Sultan Mehmed quickly took steps to control the chaos, wanted the city to survive and thrive. Mehmed renamed Constantinople to Constantini, and later it became known as Istanbul. Despite the tragedy of its fall, Constantinople would rise again under a new banner. The fall of Constantinople also had deep political and religious consequences. More practically, the fall disrupted trade between Europe and Asia, ironically. The destruction of Constantinople helped spark the Renaissance. From the ashes of Byzantium rose a new world. The Middle Ages had come to an end. The fall of Constantinople sent shockwaves across Europe. The loss of the city was more than just the collapse of a fortress, it was the end of an empire that had traced its roots directly to ancient Rome. Many in Europe could not believe that Constantinople, as the queen of cities, the bastion of Eastern Christianity, had been conquered. Churches across the continent held mourning services. Priests and preachers called for repentance and warned of divine wrath. To many Europeans, the fall of the Byzantine capital felt like a catastrophe foretold in the Book of Revelation. Spain, driven by competition and curiosity, supported bold ventures like Christopher Columbus's westward voyage. The search for a direct passage to Asia eventually led Europeans to discover the Americas, to map the world's oceans, and to establish vast colonial empires. In this way, the fall of Constantinople changed not only Europe, it changed the world. Pope Nicholas V, who had called in vain for European powers to support the defense of Constantinople, was devastated. As the Ottomans took over the city, many Greek-speaking scholars, monks, artists, and philosophers fled westward. Although the Western Roman Empire had fallen nearly 1,000 years earlier, in 476 AD, the Byzantine Empire had always called itself Roman. Its rulers were emperors of the Romans, and its people believed they carried the legacy of Caesar and Augustus. For centuries, Muslim empires had dreamed of taking the city, which the Prophet Muhammad himself had reportedly predicted would fall to a Muslim army. Sultan Mehmed II became a legendary figure, praised not only as a great warrior, but as a just and enlightened ruler. He established a multicultural capital, welcomed diverse populations, and invested in architecture, education, and the arts. It closed the gates of Byzantium, but opened the doors to exploration, innovation, and rebirth. It shattered old beliefs, but laid the foundation for new ones. Under his rule, Istanbul would grow into one of the greatest cities in the world. The old walls fell, but ideas flew free. A city fell, but the world rose. The city of Constantinople itself had been built to be the new Rome. With its fall in 1453, the last remnant of that ancient world finally disappeared. Some compared it to the fall of Troy or the destruction of Jerusalem. It became a symbol of lost glory, a warning against disunity, and a call to vigilance. In time, it also became a romanticized event, remembered as the tragic end of a once great civilization. They carried with them ancient Greek manuscripts, texts by Plato, Aristotle, Euclid, and many others that had been preserved in the libraries of Byzantium. In Russia, some Orthodox Christians began to refer to Moscow as the Third Rome. They saw themselves as the spiritual successors of Byzantium. The first Rome had fallen to heresy, they believed. The second Rome had fallen to the Turks. this was more than just political symbolism. It reflected his desire to blend the legacy of Rome with the rising power of Islam. He encouraged the preservation of Byzantine institutions, traditions, and even the use of Greek as an administrative language. In doing so, he transformed the idea of empire itself, melding East and West into a new imperial identity. Now, Moscow would take up the mantle of Orthodox leadership and carry the faith forward. This belief would shape Russian identity for centuries. These works, long forgotten or unavailable in the Latin West, suddenly became available to scholars in Italy and beyond. The loss of the Eastern Christian capital further widened the gap between the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches. Cities like Florence, Venice, and Rome became centers of learning and creativity. Artists such as Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael drew inspiration from the ancient world. The Patriarch of Constantinople was placed under Ottoman authority. While the Sultan allowed religious practice to continue, the church was now subject to Islamic rule. Many Orthodox believers saw the fall as a sign of divine punishment or a test of faith. Over the centuries, Orthodox Christianity would survive, but it would never again wield the same political power or cultural influence as it had during the Byzantine era. Thinkers like Erasmus and Machiavelli were influenced by Greek philosophy and political theory. The printing press, recently invented by Gutenberg, allowed these ideas to spread quickly. If Constantinople could fall, then so could other cities. The rigid hierarchies and traditions of the Middle Ages gave way to curiosity, experimentation, and humanism. Universities expanded their curricula. Science began to challenge superstition. People began to see the world in new ways, not just through the lens of religion, but through the rediscovered writings of antiquity. European rulers feared that Mehmed II might push deeper into the Balkans, perhaps even into Italy or Central Europe. In fact, within a few decades, the Ottomans would threaten Vienna itself. But in 1453, the European response was slow and disorganized. The continent was divided by internal wars, political rivalries, and a lack of unity. Even though some Byzantine leaders had reluctantly agreed to unite the two churches under the Pope in hopes of gaining military aid, most of the Orthodox faithful rejected the compromise. When help didn't arrive, it was seen as both a betrayal and a tragedy. In political circles, kings and emperors suddenly realized the threat that the Ottoman Empire posed. However, the fall of Constantinople had another, more unexpected consequence. It disrupted the overland trade routes between Europe and Asia for centuries. Merchants had passed through Constantinople on their way to the east, bringing back silk, spices, jewels, and other valuable goods. Now, those routes were under Ottoman control, and taxes and restrictions were imposed. European traders began looking for alternatives. This economic shift would help spark the age of exploration. Portugal, already exploring the African coast, doubled its efforts to find a sea route to India. At the same time, the cultural and intellectual impact was immense. This flood of classical knowledge helped spark the Renaissance, a period of intellectual, artistic, and cultural rebirth in Europe. In many ways, the fall of Constantinople helped to create the modern world. It marked a turning point in the movement from medieval to modern thought. But for the Eastern Orthodox world, the fall was a spiritual and cultural catastrophe. Symbolically, the fall of Constantinople was also the final death of the Roman Empire, yet the Roman idea did not die completely. In the Islamic world, the conquest of Constantinople was seen as a triumph of faith. Mehmed also took on a new title, Caesar of the Romans, claiming to be the rightful heir to the Roman Empire. Meanwhile, in Western Europe, writers and historians began to chronicle the fall of Constantinople in somber tones. But history is rarely simple. The fall of Constantinople was not just a tragedy, it was also a beginning. It ended one world, but gave rise to another. In many ways, it was the most symbolic day of the 15th century, the moment when medieval Europe stepped into the light of the modern age. After the dust of battle settled and the last cries of the fallen faded into silence, a new chapter in the history of Constantinople began. One written not in the language of the Byzantines, but in the bold strokes of the Ottoman Empire. The Sultan invited people of all faiths and ethnicities to settle in the city, offering incentives for resettlement. Greeks, Armenians, Jews, Slavs, and Turks were welcomed. The fall of Constantinople reshaped global geopolitics. It strengthened the Ottoman Empire and allowed it to expand deep into Europe. The decades following 1453, the Ottomans would conquer the Balkans, parts of Hungary, and threaten Austria and Italy. For centuries, castles and walls had been seen as impenetrable. But the use of gunpowder artillery by Mehmed changed everything. The Great Bombard demonstrated that even the strongest fortifications could be brought down by sustained cannon fire. This revolutionized military strategy. Across Europe, rulers began to redesign their cities and fortresses to withstand bombardment, angled bastions, thicker walls, and underground defenses, waiting for the day he would awaken and retake Constantinople for Christianity. Muslim chroniclers celebrated the fulfillment of prophecy, as many believed the Prophet Muhammad had foretold the conquest of Constantinople. For Orthodox Christians, it was the moment their civilization was shattered. Even as Istanbul flourished under Ottoman rule, the legacy of Byzantium remained visible. Churches were converted into mosques, but their architectural style endured. Mosaics, columns, and domes reminded visitors that this had once been the heart of another empire. The layers of history were everywhere layered, one atop the other, like palimpsests. Where old truths never fully disappeared? The story of Constantinople is not just a historical account. It's a reflection of human ambition, resilience, tragedy, and transformation. For European powers, it was a wake-up call and the start of a new direction. And that from the ruins of one civilization, another can rise different, but equally capable of shaping the world. Built in the 6th century by Emperor Justinian, it had been the largest cathedral in the world for nearly 1,000 years. Its dome was an architectural marvel, its walls filled with golden mosaics. It ended the 1,000-year-old Byzantine Empire, shifted the center of power from Christian Europe to the Muslim Middle East. It sparked a chain of events that led to the Renaissance, the age of exploration, and the modern era. When the Ottomans took the city, Mehmed walked into Hagia Sophia, marveled at its beauty, and declared it a mosque. He added minarets and a mihrab pointing to Mecca. For centuries after, it remained a place of worship and a symbol of imperial power. For Muslims, it was a triumph and a new beginning. In the 20th century, it was converted into a museum by the Republic of Turkey, symbolizing secularism and cultural unity. In the 21st century, it was reconverted into a mosque, sparking renewed global debate. Even today, the legacy of the fall echoes through politics, religion, and identity. Each retelling of the story carried different meanings, shaped by who was telling it and why. Mehmed became a hero not just to the Turks, but to the entire Muslim world. His image was one of power, wisdom, and destiny. These myths kept hope alive during centuries of Ottoman rule. Though unrealistic, they gave comfort to those who had lost their homeland and identity. Their navy would challenge Venice in Spain and the Mediterranean. Gunpowder was now the future. Armies began to include engineers, artillery units, and logistics corps. Warfare became more technical, more scientific. The balance of power shifted from feudal lords and knights to states with centralized armies and cannons. The fall of Constantinople symbolized this evolution in violent clarity. Europe now had a powerful empire at its doorstep, an empire that was confident, capable, and expansive. In art and literature, the fall was portrayed as both tragic and heroic. Poets wrote laments about the lost city. Painters depicted the golden domes and crumbling walls in romantic tones. Chroniclers turned Constantine XI into a martyr king, a leader who chose death over surrender. His sacrifice was immortalized in Orthodox tradition, and his story became legend. Some even claimed he never died, but would one day return to reclaim the city. He knew that to revive the city's greatness, he needed people, trade, and diversity. The former capital of Byzantium would become a new imperial capital, cosmopolitan and dynamic. Sultan Mehmed II, now Mehmed the Conqueror, set out not to destroy the city, but to transform it. Schools, libraries, mosques, and bathhouses were built throughout the city. Istanbul was reborn not in the image of Rome, but as a unique blend of East and West, Islam and legacy. The city became a vibrant crossroads between Asia and Europe, and its population quickly grew. Under Ottoman rule, it would thrive for centuries, as one of the most important cities on the planet. He had a clear vision. Istanbul would become the jewel of his empire, a center of politics, culture, trade, and religion. Mehmed immediately ordered repairs to the shattered city. The walls were rebuilt, aqueducts restored, and markets reopened. He established the Topkapi Palace, which became the heart of Ottoman administration. Yet while the Ottomans celebrated their victory, the Christian world mourned. In response, European powers began to look outward. The need to bypass Ottoman-controlled trade routes pushed them to explore the seas. Spain and Portugal funded voyages into the Atlantic. They discovered new lands, established colonies, and created global trade networks. These developments would soon lead to European empires that spanned the world from the Americas to Africa, India to Southeast Asia. Ironically, the loss of Constantinople helped drive Europe into the age of global dominance. The fall of Constantinople also forced a re-evaluation of warfare. The age of the medieval knight and fortress was over, yet the emotional and psychological impact of the city's fall went beyond military and political realms. Among the Greek people, tales of the marble emperors spread stories that said Constantine XI was turned to stone by an angel at the moment of death and hidden beneath the city on the Ottoman side. Mehmed II was glorified as a second Alexander the Great, or even as a divine agent. As centuries passed, the memory of Constantinople's fall became a touchstone for different identities and ideologies. Interestingly, the physical city itself still bore marks of its past. And then there was Hagia Sophia, the most powerful symbol of all. But in the minds of many, Hagia Sophia remained the soul of Constantinople, a sacred site that belonged to no single religion or nation. In educational texts, documentaries, and discussions about world history, the fall of Constantinople is consistently cited as one of the most significant events of all time. Yet beyond the dates and battles lies something more emotional. The story of a city that stood at the crossroads of the world, that connected civilizations, and that embodied the rise and fall of empires. It teaches us that no power lasts forever, that technology changes the game, that faith, identity, and culture are fragile yet enduring. As dawn broke on May 29, 1453, Constantinople stood on the brink of catastrophe. For nearly 2 months, the defenders had fought valiantly, but exhaustion, fear, and dwindling resources left them vulnerable. Once inside, they opened the gates to let more soldiers in. He entered Hagia Sophia and ordered it preserved and converted rather than destroyed. The loss of the city highlighted the growing divisions in Europe, particularly between Catholics and Orthodox Christians. They brought with them ancient Greek and Roman manuscripts, ideas and knowledge that had been preserved in the East for centuries. These exiles helped spark the Renaissance, a rebirth of classical learning, science, and art in Western Europe. Historians often consider May 29, 1453, as the day the Middle Ages ended and the modern age began. Mehmed II, now known as Mehmed the Conqueror, declared himself Kaiser-i-Rom, the Roman Caesar. The Ottomans were now a dominant power on the continent's doorstep. Over the next few decades, they advanced into the Balkans, Hungary, and even laid siege to Vienna. For Christians, it was a tragic end to a sacred city that had stood as the guardian of Eastern Christianity for 1,000 years. For Muslims, it was a miraculous victory, fulfilling prophecies and bringing prestige to the Ottoman sultans. For historians, it represented a clear marker between two great eras, medieval and modern. It was an end, but also a beginning. The world that emerged after 1453 was not the same as the one before. New ideas, new powers, and new ambitions now defined the age. Christian kingdoms began to build stronger alliances and invest in better military technologies to resist Ottoman expansion. The ancient walls of the city still stand in places, bearing the scars of that final battle. Hagia Sophia, once a church, then a mosque, then a museum, and now a mosque again, remains a powerful symbol of cultural and religious transformation. The city of Istanbul, bustling with life, commerce, and history, carries forward the legacy of its many pasts, Byzantine, Roman, and Ottoman. It is a living monument to one of history's greatest turning points. Fortresses, gunpowder weapons, and organized standing armies became more common. It was the day the Roman Empire finally died, the day the Middle Ages ended, and the day the modern world began. The ripples from that event are still felt today in politics, religion, culture, and geography. It reminds us how one city, at a crucial crossroads of civilization, can influence the course of history for centuries to come. The psychological impact of Constantinople's fall cannot be overstated. It shattered the illusion of Christian superiority and revealed a new balance of power in the world. He saw himself as the rightful heir to the Roman emperors. Moscow began to see itself as the Third Rome, a spiritual successor to the fallen Byzantine Empire. Ivan III of Russia married Sophia Palaeologina, a niece of the last Byzantine emperor, strengthening that claim. The Russian Orthodox Church adopted many Byzantine customs, and Russian rulers styled themselves as Tsars, derived from Caesar. Thus, the legacy of Byzantium lived on, not only in Istanbul, but in the distant courts of Moscow and beyond. The spiritual and political influence of Constantinople remained alive long after the empire itself had vanished. Under his rule, Istanbul became one of the most powerful cities in the world. The Ottomans built great mosques, palaces, and institutions. Trade flourished, the arts bloomed, and the empire expanded in every direction. Mehmed also respected the city's diverse religious communities. He allowed the Orthodox Church to continue under a new patriarch, showing a measure of religious tolerance uncommon for the time. His vision turned Istanbul into a vibrant, multicultural capital that would stand for centuries as a symbol of Ottoman greatness. The echoes of ancient Rome that had endured for more than a millennium were now silenced. In their place, a new era of empires, exploration, science, and cultural rebirth was beginning to rise. The Renaissance, already underway in parts of Italy, was supercharged by the migration of Byzantine scholars and their vast libraries of classical texts. Greek philosophy, mathematics, and science began to spread across Europe, influencing thinkers like Leonardo da Vinci, Copernicus, and Erasmus. Constantinople had fallen, but the knowledge it preserved was now igniting change across the continent. Ironically, the fall of Constantinople accelerated the intellectual awakening of the West. Without that tragic loss, Europe might not have experienced such a rapid rediscovery of ancient wisdom. In many ways, it was a result of centuries of mistrust, including the memory of the Fourth Crusade, which had seen Latin crusaders sack Constantinople in 1204. Eastern Christians remembered that betrayal, and unity between East and West had never fully been restored. Now, the West watched helplessly as the seat of Eastern Christianity was overtaken by a new Islamic power. The event left an emotional scar on the Orthodox world, especially in places like Russia and Greece. He invited Muslim, Christian, and Jewish communities to repopulate the city. Craftsmen, scholars, and merchants were given incentives to settle there. Now, with the Ottomans controlling the Bosporus, Europeans began looking for new sea routes to the east. This search for alternative paths helped launch the Age of Exploration. Explorers like Christopher Columbus and Vasco da Gama sailed out to find ways to reach Asia without crossing Ottoman territory. In this way, the fall of Constantinople indirectly led to the discovery of the New World and the expansion of European colonial empires. Over the following years, Constantinople, now renamed Istanbul, rose again, this time as the heart of the Ottoman Empire. The fall of the city symbolized not only the end of the Byzantine Empire, but also the final death of the ancient Roman world. It had survived in the East for more than 1,000 years after Rome itself had fallen in the West. But now, the last remnant was gone. Chaos erupted. Emperor Constantine XI, refusing to flee, cast off his imperial regalia and charged into battle, fighting to the death. His body was never conclusively identified, and legends say he died as a soldier, not as a ruler. With the emperor dead and resistance crumbling, the Ottomans flooded into the city. What followed was brutal. As per the customs of siege warfare, Mehmed allowed his troops to plunder the city for 3 days. Churches, homes, and public buildings were ransacked. Many citizens were killed or enslaved. The great church of Hagia Sophia, the most sacred site of Eastern Christianity, was stormed. Priests holding liturgies were slaughtered, and the building was soon converted into a mosque. It was a day of horror for the people of Constantinople. That morning, Sultan Mehmed II gave the final order. His forces launched a massive 3-stage assault from all sides. Waves of infantry crashed into the city's battered walls, beginning with the irregular troops, the Bashi Bazaks, followed by Anatolian soldiers, and then the elite Janissaries. The defenders fought back with desperation, pouring boiling oil, launching arrows, and firing cannons. But they could not hold off the unending tide. The turning point came when Giovanni Giustiniani, the Genoese commander, was seriously wounded. His withdrawal from the battlefield crushed morale among the defenders, and the Byzantine lines began to collapse. At one of the weak points in the wall near the gate of St. Romanas, Ottoman forces finally breached the defenses. Despite the destruction, Sultan Mehmed II quickly took steps to transform the city into the capital of his empire. The fall of Constantinople shocked the Christian world. Pope Nicholas V called for a new crusade to retake the city, but no European power had the means or unity to respond. But even amid the grief, something transformative began. Many Byzantine scholars, fearing Ottoman rule, fled westward to Italy and other parts of Europe. Trade routes also shifted after the fall. For centuries, Constantinople had been a vital link in the Silk Road and other overland trade networks. The fall of Constantinople not only marked the end of the Byzantine Empire, but symbolically closed the book on the medieval era. For the Ottomans, the conquest was more than a military victory, it was a statement of empire. Meanwhile, in Europe, the fall of Constantinople served as a wake-up call. In Russia, the fall of Constantinople took on special meaning. Over time, Constantinople's fall became more than just a historical event. It became a symbol. Today, the story of the fall of Constantinople continues to inspire, teach, and fascinate. In the end, the fall of Constantinople was not merely a military defeat, it was a reshaping of the world.